Hi, welcome back. All right, so here we go. We're going to get into a little bit of anthropometrics for this video. So remember, there are those two other factors, and I'll talk a little bit about them to begin with. So the first one is anthropometrics. It's mainly about measurements. Okay, that's something that's really, really important. And then also physiological factors are related to physical aspects, so like comfort, fatigue, body tolerances. Psychological factors are about mental behaviors, perceptions, alertness, these types of things, right? So it's that psychological aspect versus the physical versus the measurement. So remember, a lot of these things and where this can be used in is biomechanics, materials. It is trying to create a science out of the way that people interact with their products. Okay, so the first one is anthropometrics. And the IB definition is that anthropometrics are the aspect of ergonomics that deals with body measurements, those of size, strength, and physical capacity. So that's important to remember, though I've got a lot of photos here about the sizes. It's actually really important to understand the strength and physical capacity. So people at different age ranges, so even children to elderly or to middle age, they open a door in a different way. Their strength is different. It's just part of that growth, their age range, and makes things different. So that's other things to consider in anthropometrics as well. The measurements and the body size of people, but also how they use it and their strength. All right, so here's an overview of what we're going to be talking about. So it's really trying to focus on that human-centered aspect of it. So considering all the possible information, including this data that we can collect and how it gets used in percentile ranges, and talking about adjustability, clearance, and reach too. Okay. So a little bit of a history. Maybe you've seen it in art classes, or maybe you've seen it in inventions or technology, but the Vitruvian man is the similar concept where you've got these proportions, or you have these measurements in people that you can collect, and this data you can collect in order to make your designs better. Okay. So the first one that we'll talk about is the percentile ranges. So whenever we're collecting all of this data, after we've collected all, actually, you know what? I think I'm going to jump down and talk about data collection and how you collect data for in certain situations. So let me just scroll down a little bit, and I'm going to find the slides, and then I'll click on it. So users and data. There are these different devices that you can use to collect that data for people. So these are kind of fancy anthropometric boards. These are stadiometers. These are anthropometers. These are all measurements. You can even use, like we used in class, you can even use a ruler or measuring tape of some kind as well. That works just as good too. But these things sometimes require some type of training or some type of understanding to be able to get some of that data and that information correct. So it's not easy to just use this thing and say, hey, that's what it is. But so other things about that, person's clothes can get in the way. Maybe you don't have the right amount of people or the right sample size. Maybe it's not completely accurate. So that's one of the things about this data collection that's important to understand. Okay. So I can also go back up and talk about primary data versus secondary data. So as you're collecting this data, there's different ways to do it. Primary data is when I'm the one who's collecting it. Secondary data is when you get it from some other information. So looking at these two diagrams, primary data is I've gone out, I've got my ruler, I've got my measuring tape, and I collect data based on the waist size of that person. We also have a book in class that's a measure of human and man, where somebody else has already collected all that data and is able to present it in another way. Okay, so that's how we go about collecting some of these data. And just remember that there are limitations and there are certain positives and negatives to how that data is worked or used. Okay, so I think I can, And one last point, that's how you collect it, but there's also different types of data. There's static data and there's dynamic data. So just looking at these two different images, this is an image of dynamic data, where things are moving. People are carrying out a certain task. Versus static data is where people are staying flat and straight. So if we look back on, head back up towards that original drawing back here, this is the difference between this is dynamic and this is static. Okay, so understand that. All right, going back again, I think I can see the review of it. So here you see static versus dynamic data and the primary versus the secondary. Okay, don't forget, if you ever have any questions or if I bounce around, you can go back to just press stop, rewind, and try to read again. Okay, so once you collect all of that data, then it comes into percentile ranges and percentiles. So if you were to collect all of this data and you measured students on the height range, yeah, you collected all their heights and you've got this average kind of height. Most of the people fall into this area, right? So we're looking at this photograph. There's a couple of people that are tall. There's a few people that are short, but most people fall right inside the middle, okay? So what this is called is a percentile range. So there's a certain population, percentage of a population that fits into this range. If we collected 100% of the information, 100% of a class, right, we would put a certain amount of people in this 50%, there'd be some in this 5%, and then there'd be some in this 95%. So then you can represent it as a graph. So this is all that data collected. There's a few people here, there's a few people there, but there's lots of people in the middle. So that's a percentile range, all right? How you use this, you can use this to design certain products. So designs are made for thinking of those people. So this guy, he's probably in that 95th percentile, so he's probably over here, really tall, and he can't fit through that door. So that has to be designed for the 95th percentile so they can pass in. Because anybody, if it's tall enough for these people to fit, anybody can fit, even the small person can go through it. This is a bit trickier example, but you'll get the chance to find some better ones. This is the gear shift on a car. So if the gear shift is designed for the 95th and you can't reach it, it's too far away, then that 5th percentile can't use it. Even though it's going to be short and you'll be a bit squished for that person, that tall guy, then he can still use it even though it's a little bit squished. So it's important to understand how these work. What are these design contexts? So for your task is going to be to find some of those examples. So 1, you can press pause and you need to find some examples of the 5th or the 95th. So for example, elevators need to be designed for the 5th percentile, excuse me, because otherwise if it's too tall, a short person can't reach it, right? Same thing goes for vending machines. Okay. And then sometimes in emergency cases, everybody needs to be able to get to it. So again, looking at it being a little bit lower. Okay. So if you want to flip through the sides, you can also see a couple of other examples and see their definitions of what the examples are. Okay. So your task right now is to press pause and fill out the form, finding some of those examples of the 95th and the 5th. Okay. Press pause. All right, welcome back. So the other thing is that 50th percentile. So there are certain limitations and there are things that make a difference because that 50th percentile doesn't actually exist, okay? But we're gonna get to that in a minute in another video.